financial literacy, teaming up together. And we brought here a St. John's alum, Mark Flynn, and he works in the Silicon Valley and basically as venture capitalist. So, yeah, that's Mark Flynn.
Great, thank you. My background was I got out of St. John's a few years ago and was sort of an econ major, and then spent worked as a consultant for a few years, went to graduate school, then worked on Wall Street for about 15 years for a firm called Solomon Brothers, one of the big investment banks. And then about 10 years ago started my own investment firm. So what I thought would be interesting to talk about, because very topical in what I think has been one of the most dynamic financial periods in the last 24 months, is really this sort of economic meltdown that you've experienced. You probably have a good fortune of being in school where you can talk about it and study it, but I'd say out in the real world, a lot of people are kind of living the, sort of living this problem day in and day out. And what I want to do is tell you sort of my view on what was the cause of this financial problem and what were some of the unintended consequences. How did we get there? What do we learn from it? What are we going to try and prevent going forward? I also know I'm probably like the last thing before spring break for some of you, so I'm sure I'm not going to try and keep you very long. But a lot of people look at what triggered this problem, the sort of financial collapse of a number of financial institutions. Also, you saw bankruptcies of companies like General Motors and Chrysler. And you also saw this incredible situation a year ago where the U.S. government stepped in and was bailing out banks and all these different financial institutions like AIG. And that was very unprecedented. I mean, from time to time you've seen this in the last 30 or 40 years, but the order of magnitude is very, very different. So this was a period that was very shocking, and it came about very, very quickly. What I thought I'd try to do is explain to you, how this, what evolved, what happened, and what were the signals that we should have been seeing that might have prevented it. And I'd say most of the problem came around what people characterize as the housing bubble. And easiest way for me to explain it is if you went back to, say, 1996, and you went to St. Cloud and you bought a house for $100,000, okay? The conventional wisdom is you go take a mortgage and the bank would require you to put 20% down in equity, cash equity, okay? So you'd have $20,000 of equity. And then they would loan you $80,000 on a mortgage, okay? So here you borrowed $80,000. And if you were borrowing this at a rate of 6%, don't hold me accountable for this math because I did it in an earlier meeting and I wasn't sure I got it right, but let's say you had an interest rate of 6% on this mortgage and you were paying principal and interest over 30 years, your monthly payment would be $479, okay? So this was about 1996. So somebody buys a house in 96. This is what's going on. House worth $100,000 with $20,000 in equity. They got an $80,000 mortgage, 6%. They're paying about $479 a month. What you saw in the late 90s and beginning of the last decade is if you rolled forward to 2006, people say this house probably doubled in value. Okay. So what was worth $100,000 became worth $200,000. And what evolved is if you went out and got this home appraised for $200,000, a bank would still lend you 80% of the value. Okay? So you formally had an $80,000 mortgage. Now you could go out and borrow, and it would be, get the math here. Yeah, they're going to lend you 8%, so they're going to lend you 140, right? 160, sorry. The bank's going to now lend you 100, so you're now going to have a mortgage. The bank is going to effectively double the amount of money they're going to lend you, okay? So now you've got a mortgage because the increased value of the house afforded you the ability to go back to the bank and refinance, okay? And so now what you gained through this transaction was you gained about $80,000 of purchasing power. And so people went and refinanced their home because of the increased value of it. But the real problem came about in the 2003, 4, 5 time period is when people went and refinanced, they ended up using what are called adjustable rate mortgages, or ARMs, A-R-M. And so what they'd often say to you is, come and borrow this $160,000, and we're going to have you do a program where you only pay interest only. Or we're going to have something that has a rate, an interest rate that adjusts over time. And many of them came out with what is called a teaser rate. So if the going interest rate was 6% at the time of the mortgage, they'd say, you know what, we're going to have you start at a 3.5% interest rate, okay? And what people didn't realize is the adjustable rate mortgage meant after a couple of years, this is going to adjust about 7%, okay? And they also said rather than paying, this was principal and interest, all we need from you is you only have to go out and pay interest only, okay? So here my payment on $80,000 was $479. If I went and did this interest-only mortgage, here's the magic. I now have borrowed an additional $80,000. My interest only is costing me $467 less than I was paying previously. And so a lot of people jumped into these programs. First of all, they took advantage of an inflated value as the inflation came about in their home, and then they went and borrowed the money. Okay, and they may have taken that $80,000 and bought a lake house, RV, new cars, college education, etc. So what happened is they looked at the math and said, geez, for less money, I can have more cash available. What they didn't realize, and I think what came about, was these mortgages had adjustment provisions in them. So it would be 3.5% for about 18 months. Then it would adjust to, say, 7%. So now you've got, in about 18 months, your monthly payment has gone from $467 and is doubled. Okay? So this is the problem that triggered a lot of the financial malaise. What happened was you had a housing bubble, you saw dramatic inflation and a doubling in a lot of real estate, people going and borrowing. There were very lax lending standards, so people didn't apply a lot of discipline to how they were going to lend the money to them. And ultimately what happened is these people, when they got into these loans, they thought, well, I'm just going to refinance. And when my rate moves up to 7%, I'm just going to go find another teaser loan at 3.5%, okay? Well, they then went to refinance, and then what you saw happening, I'm going to call it in the 2007, 2008 period, is you then saw like a 30% deflationary pressure on the house, okay? So the house here was worth $200,000. It loses 30% of its value. So now when they go get an appraisal, the appraisal says your house is now worth $140,000.